Hi, this is Lindsay Oden, Special Research Assistant at the Washington State Attorney General's Office, and this is your AGO Moment in History. In this series, our office will be releasing clips from our Oral History Project, an ongoing effort to collect and preserve the history of the Attorney General's Office as told by the people who have worked here over the years. In this episode, former Deputy AGs Jeff Goltz and Shirley Battan interview former Attorney General and Governor Gregoire. Gregoire served 3 terms as Washington State's Attorney General from 1993 to 2005. Prior to her tenure as AG, she had been hired as an Assistant Attorney General by Slade Gorton. She was later promoted to Deputy Attorney General under Ken Eikenberry, and she was the first woman to hold that position. In this clip, Governor Gregoire describes the culture of the AGO Spokane branch and what it was like to be a woman in the AGO at that time. Let's take a listen.
Can you tell us a little bit about what the culture of the office was like back in those days?
Well, see, I'm in Spokane.
Right.
So it's really, I can't speak to the culture in Olympia or Seattle and so on. But Spokane, people will be shocked at this. But as I mentioned, we had one attorney for social and health services for Eastern Washington. There was no Yakima, Tri-Cities, Wenatchee, none of that existed. There was Spokane and that was it. So we had L&I, we had education, and we had consumer protection. We were small, and then the legislature passed the dependency laws, which took that away from prosecutors' offices and turned it over to the Attorney General's office. And voila, I mean, the world changed for us. And we were on speed dial at that point. And I was in a car because I then was hired on to represent social health services, and my predecessor left. And I was in a car traveling all of Eastern Washington to do a dependency case constantly. So think back to that, to today when we have now, what do we have, 4 offices total in Eastern Washington?
I think that's right, or 5.
Yakima, Tri-Cities, Wenatchee, Spokane.
Right.
Pullman, if you count Pullman.
And Pullman.
Oh, well, we had Pullman back then.
Yeah.
But I mean, to do social and health
Yeah.
services, can you imagine? So the culture right back then was just kind of deer in the headlights. How are we going to ever be able to do this and make this work and so on and so forth? And, you know, there was a culture back then against women lawyers, and I experienced it, particularly as I went into more rural areas, more rural courthouses in Eastern Washington, and got hometowned fairly consistently. Would say to the opposing counsel, who'd you bring with you today? Well, this is Assistant Attorney General Christine Gregoire. So it was a different time in the practice of law, and in the practice of law in the AG's office.
So I think it was 1980 when Ken Eikenberry asked you to be deputy. Was it 80, 81?
Well, first I became the head of the
Spokane
office.
Okay.
Yes.
What year was that?
Golly, it would be in that time frame, right?
Okay.
Yeah, it would be in that time frame. And so I had been asked before by Ed Mackey to do so. And I had declined because I felt I wasn't qualified enough. I hadn't been an attorney long enough, and so on and so forth. And so then the second time when Ken asked personally, I was delighted and accepted that. Wasn't, frankly, in that job all that long before I was invited to come over and be a deputy.
Right. And so you want to talk about when you moved over here to Olympia, you saw a much bigger Attorney General's office and were part of that. Do you want to comment on the culture at that time?
Well, you know, if you come, as I did, from Spokane over to Olympia, what you found, I think, was Olympia was very, very large and very, very small, if you know what I mean.
Mm-hmm.
Large
Still is in some ways.
Yes, true. Large in numbers, but we had a culture then, and I hope to say probably still do, of just kind of being a little family and all working together and covering each other's backs, and, you know, it was kind of like that. And I wasn't over here very long, though, then I got just, you know, assigned the comparable worth case. And so my life took a turn there that was dramatic, because I spent well over a year, did nothing else, just consumed by that case.
Do you want for the purpose of video, why don't you describe what that case was about and what happened?
So comparable worth is a theory of equal pay for comparable work as measured by a certain set of numbers. And what the plaintiffs, the state employees, brought in that case was an articulation that predominantly female classifications that had been valued virtually identically to predominantly male classifications were paid disproportionately, and that inherently constituted discrimination, and therefore the predominantly female classifications had to be brought up to the pay scale of male. I remember when I got here, Rich Heath was the head of the division. He had brought in a guy who had just come off a clerkship, graduated from law school, had been a federal clerk, and that was the team. And I remember going over there, looking through it, and volumes of it for discovery purposes that you could tell was about to besiege us. And I remember going back to Ed Mackey and saying, well, I have to tell you my evaluation of the situation you have over in that division, which is that you're going to trial and you have no trial skills at all on your team. One has observed it from a clerk position. One has done it administratively, but not in federal court for a case of that length. So you've got a real challenge on your hands. I think it was 2 hours later, in came Ed with Ken Eikenberry, the Attorney General, to say, we have solved your problem and you are it. And that was probably one, other than tobacco, one of the most time-consuming things I've ever done, to include many days that Rich would tell you, we would take a break, go home, take a shower, change clothes, come back to work, and that's all we did. It was all-consuming.
Right. Well, you were the first woman deputy in the Attorney General's office. At the time, were there women in equivalent positions in other AG's offices around the country, or was it unusual? Unusual. We clearly were a front-runner state, and I attribute that to Slade and to Ken, both who I think had blinders on in terms of that issue. They just wanted well-qualified people, and they were determined to make that happen. And little-known story, I remember when Ken wanted me to consider coming over, I was actually pregnant at the time. And I remember saying to him, I need to be honest with you. And I know it means that you will not have me do the job, but I'm okay with that. And when I finished, he said, fine by me that you're pregnant. It doesn't matter to me. I still want you to do the job. And today that sounds like nothing. Back then that was a big deal. Yes.
And Slade just intentionally, frankly, seeing women just starting to go to law school and seeing that as a gold mine to the public service, knowing full well that those individuals probably were not going to get many jobs in the private sector. And he saw it as a potential gold mine. So 2 really breakthrough attorneys general in our state that wasn't true around the country.
Yeah. And they're both very proud of that, by the way.
As well they should be. And I have thanked them publicly, and I will continue to do so.
Yeah. So going back to the comparable worth case, was that pretty much the largest case you handled while you were a deputy attorney general then? Probably. You also had a Supreme Court argument as your deputy attorney general.
Yes. Right.
So, in addition to supervising 4, 6, 7 divisions, you were also very much a hands-on practicing lawyer.
Yes, you know this.
Yes, I do know this. And
sometimes you thought I was too hands-on, as I recall.
That's right. But for the record, I was in the ecology division, and we reported up to Deputy Attorney General Gregoire at the time. But
Navy home port was a big deal.
Navy home port was a big deal. that was where the question was whether or not the state of Washington, what controls they would have over water pollution activity up in Everett.
Yeah, whether the United States Navy had to get a shoreline permit.
Right, yeah. So how did you balance the administrative obligations that you had, being one of the top echelon of the Attorney General's office, with management oversight of a large portion of the office, being part of the Ken Eikenberry's leadership team or executive team, with being a hands-on lawyer? How did that work out?
So, I think that was the understanding in the office, that if you want to keep good people, which I assume I would have qualified as, if you want to keep good people, then you need to let them do things that they find fun and exciting and enjoyable. And I loved the practice of law. And so if I was just going to be an administrator, I probably wasn't going to last very long. And I think Ed knew that, and Ken knew that, and so they gave me opportunities, frankly, that I think were benefit to the office, but importantly, they were a benefit to me. I mean, who in the world would ever have argued a case that few years out of law school, as I was given the chance to do? But they put, their confidence in me and gave me a shot, and I hope I didn't lose the case. I didn't let them down. And the same was true of comparable worth. The same was true of Navy Homeport and a whole bunch of other things. The other thing is my philosophy on being a deputy in the Attorney General's office is if you don't have division chiefs that are capable of managing their own division, it's not your job to do that. Then that person needs to look to do something else in the office than that job. So we, I think, made clear that it was up to them to manage. It was up to us to help them when they needed help and to support them. And that we were better, frankly, as deputies if we actually did some practice, because that kept our skills up. That kept our abilities to talk with them about cases and help them. So I think it was the culture, as you mentioned a bit ago, that was healthy for the office and healthy to keep people and to keep people interested and excited and inspired about being in the AG's office.
So what else during your period as deputy, whether sort of management accomplishments were there? I recall one being, it was at the time when the Attorney General's Conference came into being.
Yes. Yeah.
Tell us about that.
So, I think the perspective I had was coming from Spokane. Spokane was a family. Seattle was a family, I assumed, and Olympia clearly was. But there wasn't a connection among all of us. Within the same divisions, there was an attempt, but we're all a part of one office. And, if I'm in the social health division, I may decide tomorrow I want to go to another division, but without any exposure to that. Plus, we have vast knowledge and expertise where, something uniquely could come up in social and health services, some admin issue, for example, that surely in the office there was the expertise, not within our division, but across the office. So we began talking about that and saying we should bring ourselves together and get every assistant attorney general to understand that they are part of a very large organization. And the first time you do that, everybody was stunned. I mean, now it's all taken for granted, but stunned. If you guys remember this, at how large we were and that our place in this large organization. So it wasn't to take away from the family atmosphere we had, but it was to make it clear we're one of a very large law firm, and we have vast resources inside this law firm and vast opportunities inside this law firm, and we all ought to be functioning as one.
Which also gives you a sense of the history of the office a little bit, too.
Yes.
You come together with all those folks.
Yes, yeah. Absolutely.
Because by that time, go back to the early days in the office, there were just a handful of people in the Temple of Justice and maybe a little bit in the insurance building. But by this point, we were spread all around Thurston County.
Right. When I came over, we were still in the Temple. So I was in the Temple for a while.
Right.
But we were, an office here, an office there, an office everywhere. And how we were connecting back then, as I look back on it, I really don't know. and yet we had crossover issues and so on. AG conference was
Yeah.
one way to get us to start communicating.
Thanks for listening to this AGO moment in history. Be sure to like and subscribe to receive updates when we upload a new episode. On our next episode, Governor Gregoire talks about her road to becoming Attorney General. Thanks, and talk to you again soon.